Welcome back to the Detox Docs Report. I'm Dr. Diana, and this show is all about thoughtful conversations around gut health, mold and environmental illness, and systems medicine. Today, I'm so excited to be joined by Dr. Jill Crista. Dr. Jill is a pioneering naturopathic doctor, best-selling author, devoted educator, and a creative innovator. Her superpower is to make complex medical concepts simple and digestible for the average person. Dr. Jill's passion is to elevate the well-being of the planet by assisting in the healing of her inhabitants. She focuses on conditions that cause injury to the brain and nervous system, including mold, PANS-PANDAS, Lyme disease, concussion, and most recently, post-COVID syndromes. Her books, products, and online courses support those wanting concrete steps to conquer health challenges. Dr. Jill, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
So, I took your courses years ago when I was first getting deeper into mold medicine. So, it's so great to finally have this conversation with you. And you've helped shape how a lot of practitioners think about mold-related illnesses. But for anyone who may not know your background, I'd love to just start with a little context on how you first got into this work.
I started in Lyme country. I started in working with Lyme patients. And, it's pretty miraculous when you can find and treat the cause, find the root cause and manage it. People tend to get better. And yet I still had this small subset of patients that weren't getting better. And in one of those patients, they found toxic black mold in a remodel. And that's when, Pandora's box sort of cracked open for me. And then when I went back to assess the other ones that weren't coming along, they had mold in almost all of those cases. And so I was like, oh, whoa, I am missing mold. As you know from taking it, my doctor class is called, Are You Missing Mold Illness? Because I was, and that just kind of cracked open this whole Pandora's box.
I love that. Yeah, that's so true for me too. We got some results from functional health, and I'm sitting here thinking, why do they not test for this in regular medicine? Why do I not test for this? Why do I not know about these labs? So once you start learning about it, you just never go back. I hear
Yeah,
that.
yeah, it's the mold goggles that get
Yeah.
the lenses of mold. That's like with Lyme too. Like you can't unsee Bartonella once you see it. You can't unsee Babesia once you see it. That's the same thing with mold. You just get an extra lens on your eyes.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Mold colored glasses.
Yeah, mold,
So, yeah.
this would be kind of
So
gross.
that's true. That's true. There are some good colors mold. I like the
That's true.
purple mold. It's pretty. So the mold conversation is constantly evolving, and I just wanted to touch on that. Is there anything, or what do you think has changed the most in how we understand mold illness clinically, or anything big changes that you noticed from when you first started doing this till now?
Oh gosh, a ton from when I first
So
started
much.
because I had to learn, in the trenches, so to speak. There wasn't training on it. I mean, there was shoemaker training, but that's not how my overall training comes from naturopathic medicine. So it didn't fit my paradigm to do the same treatment on every person. So that I think is one thing that I think, naturopathic medicine has really brought in the conversation is treating the whole person and treating people as individuals. And not only people as individuals, but the toxins and the molds themselves. So I would say that the thing I'm most excited about in the last 5 years that I've really been getting better about taking what's in my brain and putting it down on paper is, each mold, each mycotoxin confluence that they can secrete, that they all come in our body through the same way, through the same front door, but they don't
Yeah.
all leave out the same back door. So what I mean by that is that we can breathe them in, we can get them in through our skin, we can eat them in our food, but in a westernized culture, we don't have a lot of mold and mycotoxins in our food. That's measured and controlled for. Um, so we're all breathing them in. So same front door, but each mycotoxin goes through a different metabolic pathway to get it out of the body. And so for the last 5 years, what I've been doing is kind of obsessively getting all of the mechanisms down on paper and kind of explaining how I'm individualizing. So like when I wrote my book, I just picked the bell curve things that were working for most average people, it is a little inefficient. So we were just talking about redoing editions of books. What I am going to do in my second edition is to give the actual, here's the mycotoxin, here's how it leaves the body. And a lot of times in the mold world, we're talking about binders, binders, binders. Well, that's a gut thing. That's a liver to gut pathway. Most mycotoxins leave through the kidneys. So if we're only focusing on binding, we're missing an entire effective way to detox these guys. So things like ochratoxin, zearalenone, citrulline, they're preferentially dumped through the kidneys, and that's why people on binders, their ochratoxin never goes down because they're not doing the kidney detoxification of that specific mycotoxin and how that specific one wants to leave the body. So yeah, I'm just super passionate about the precision part of it. And then through the study that Dr. Neil Nathan and I are doing, we're also figuring out what are the clusters of symptoms when we see multiple mycotoxins, so we can better identify when someone has multiples. So yeah, that's my big excitement right now.
Well, that's so exciting. That just made me think about with excreting through the kidneys, that makes me think about all the people who have interstitial cystitis with mold. I feel
Bingo.
like and it's so not well understood by regular medicine because a lot of it is driven by mold and toxin exposure. I mean, I see that
Right.
so frequently.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean those mycotoxins when the kidneys can flush them, and we know that there are certain things that help flush. So we know that like ochratoxin needs the orange color of bioflavonoids. That helps it flush better. Certain other toxins need like the purple color, so like a resveratrol. Some need the quercetin. So like when people are taking quercetin, they're thinking, "Oh, I'm stabilizing my mast cells," but you're also doing all these other things. You're detoxing the mycotoxins. To get them out of the kidneys, we actually have to unbind them from proteins in the blood. And certain color bands of bioflavonoids do that for each mycotoxin. So like now I'm formulating for a company called the Light Health Formulas, and I'm putting together like these are the actual bioflavonoids that unhook that mycotoxin and that mycotoxin and that mycotoxin. Put it all into one thing so that, because as we know from practice, if someone has one mycotoxin, as you start to detox them, we find many others. So then we can get rid of a bunch of them all at one time. So it's that unbinding in the blood, flushing through the kidneys, but then where do they go? They go to the bladder. And while they're in the bladder, they can really wreak havoc on the bladder lining. And then the bladder, in defense of that, will start to create biofilm. And then the bacteria take advantage of the biofilm. So it's a
Hmm.
really tough situation with the bladder. Totally treatable
Oh,
though,
yeah.
if we're paying attention to, what's the cause.
Yeah, and a standard UA is not going to test for mycotoxins. So,
No.
yeah. So, and that also made me think about because a lot of people talk about from like the SIRS side, the charge of the toxin, mycotoxins, and the binders, and how it has to be aligned or things like that. But it sounds like that's not really your standpoint, correct?
Well, that would be if we were eating them. So if you're eating
Mm-hmm.
mycotoxins, they're not bound in bile, they're just loose in the gut, and that's where charge matters. But when it's a water damage building exposure, we're breathing them in. So the pathway then goes through our respiratory passages to the bloodstream, and then preferentially out the kidneys if that's available. If it can unbind from the proteins, the kidneys would love to flush all of these out. If that doesn't happen, it'll go to the liver where it gets packaged in bile. So then the
Mm-hmm.
bile goes into the gut. So really when in a water damage building exposure, a respirable toxin, we're trying to bind bile. And that what's
Mm-hmm.
wonderful about that is that while there's a lot of studies missing on mold specifically, there are great studies on how to bind bile because bile is where our cholesterol is. So we have a lot of information from cholesterol studies that we can say, oh gosh, this insoluble fiber can lower cholesterol. That means it's binding bile and pulling it out of the body. So we can use these things, the great human studies, so we actually know dose, we know frequency, we know with or without food. And these food-based binders like psyllium husk, good old Metamucil, although that's full of
Mm-hmm.
dyes and chemicals, but you can get psyllium husk clean at your health food store really cheap. They don't have to have a pharmaceutical. And they nourish the 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 fat soluble and the B vitamins and things like that in the body. So these are like binders that can just do an exchange with the body. We can get rid of what we don't want, and we can also nourish and give the body things that it needs. So like an insoluble fiber example, a lot of people ask, well, what, like what? So psyllium husk can do it, flax seed, chia seed, bran, good old fashioned bran. That's not great for people who have SIBO. That is one of the things that mold is really correlated with causing. So if you have SIBO, you can do it with sesame seeds, pumpkin seeds, and sunflower seeds. And just basically grind those up, a quarter cup of those, and sprinkle them over food as you eat. I see levels go down with only that intervention.
I love using food-based binders. Definitely. It's so great because we sometimes we think we have to use these, medications or things that are designed to disrupt the body, but sometimes we can do the things that are designed to work with the body by using natural medicine. It's so great.
And there's actually been, that's a nice thing too about cholesterol, if we're tracking that. There have been great studies comparing psyllium husk to cholestyramine. And it's about 25% as effective as the drug. Plus, it's not depleting your other nutrients. So it's like, okay, it's a little slower, but it's still effective. So yeah, there's a number
Right.
of food-based binders we can use.
Yeah, as part of a full regimen, it can be so powerful. And then fiber is so great too, different types of fiber to feed those short chain fatty acids. I love talking about butyrate and how it's so important for the gut.
Yeah, yeah, especially those pandas kids.
For sure, for sure. So I think how the gut is part of the perpetuation cycle was also underappreciated years ago. And I'm hearing it more from all sides now in the mold conversation. And I am just so encouraged by that because, I mean, gut dysbiosis is so common. I mean, estimated 70% of people have it. And, it's chicken or the egg with mold and that, but definitely, it's so prominent and so important to deal with that dysbiosis too.
I think it's quite often it's mold is the chicken. It's so well known to be the spores themselves cause mast cell activate, or, inducing mast cells. So not always mast cell activation syndrome, but it's definitely recruiting more mast cells. The mast cells have more granules when they're made and they spill and they dump easier. And mycotoxins in particular, and also mold fragments, induce the mast cell to survive longer. So the mast cell doesn't have its natural programmed cell death. So that's the spore part. And then the mycotoxins we know cause a decrease in the commensal species in the microbiome and an increase in the non-commensal. So they do the dysbiosis just by their presence. That's why we want them to be bound in bile, because they're not as damaging when they're in bile. And they also degrade the lining of the intestines. So if we can, that's where you get more leaky gut then. So we know mold is like horrible on the gut. And then if the mold is active in your environment, it's spitting out something called mycophenolic acid. It's just I jokingly call these mold farts because they're just like metabolic off-gassing. The mold is eating, it's ingesting, it's secreting this thing. Well, we use this in medicine. It's called CellCept. And it is for people who have an organ transplant, and it's so that the body doesn't reject this foreign material. That's how immune toxic it is. And they used to use actual mold mycophenolic acid, but they had so much gut disruption. Every single person taking it had gut side effects. So they made it mycophenolate, which is just a little bit of a chemical change so that people could tolerate it more. It still is equally as immune toxic, but only 70% of people had gut disruption from the drug. So it's like, okay, we know if you are living in an active mold, if the mold is actively metabolizing, you're breathing in this thing that we're using as a pharmaceutical drug, and it's immune toxic.
Yeah, and that's tested for on some of the urine mycotoxin tests. So it's really interesting to see those levels. That is the thing I love to use when people say, well, mycotoxins aren't that harmful, or like how can you say they're that harmful? I use the mycophenolic acid as an example because people have heard of that,
Yeah.
Cellcept. I'm like, that's literally a mycotoxin.
Right.
So
Yeah.
it's,
And it's
yeah.
actually, it's a mold metabolite, not a mycotoxin. What's important about that is that not all molds are going to make mycotoxins, but if it's
Mm-mm.
metabolizing, certain molds will make MPA. So it's a way to kind of, I use it as a marker to help us answer if the person is in mold right now or not. Now, not all the
Right.
molds make it, but certain mold species, the really common ones like Aspergillus and Penicillium, they will secrete this mycophenolic acid. And so we can look at that number and say, this is one of five things that I look at to say you might be in mold right now. So, we need to pay attention to the environment.
Right. Yes. Thank you for that. For sure. So, speaking of when people are, trying to heal and you're looking at different things to see whether they might still be in the mold, how do you think about that balance between is there another exposure going on, and is this the terrain, or is this the continued inflammatory response when someone isn't recovering?
That's a really tough one to answer, and that is through clinical. This is why I created the questionnaire that I created, because I was often in that question of like, I'm not sure if you're just, did we start peeling biofilm and you're having a little flare? Are you making these mycotoxins inside your body, or is it happening from your environment? That's why I don't use just one test to answer these questions. It's a cluster is really needed because this is a very complex illness. I did the math one time that the number of molds that we test for in an environment times the number of toxins that they create times the bacteria that grow in that environment times the toxins they create, and the number of possible indoor environment exposures is 15 million. So
Wow.
that I look forward to the day when we are saying like, this person has Aspergillus mold illness. This person has
Hmm.
Stachybotrys mold illness, because they really are all so different. They look a lot the same. There are a lot of commonalities, but they're different conditions and they need to be treated differently.
Yeah, that's a really important distinction. Yeah, so true. And yeah, I've become less interested in trying to determine whether it's all exposure, all terrain, because like you said, clinically it can be both as well. And there's so many different exposures. And if someone is sensitive to mold or sensitive to toxins, then they can, of course, react way more than the next person would if you weren't sensitized to mold either. So even if you're just getting a quick exposure at, Airbnb or something like that.
Yeah, yeah. The people that have had like the college housing exposure and they just weren't,
Yep.
they kind of haven't been well since, kind of thing. And then they can limp along and they're doing okay. That's what we kind of refer to as the vertically sick. They're walking around in the world. They're not horizontally sick. They're not in bed. Sometimes that happens, but they're doing okay, 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 coping, coping, coping until they get the next mold hit, which could be 10 years later. And they're the one that reacts initially. They're going to be the immediate reactors because their cup is already full of all of the spores and the toxins and things like that. And all it took was a little bit to tip it over the edge.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. That toxin bucket. So then, how much of the chronic reactivity do you think becomes neurologic over time?
I think a lot. All mycotoxins together, we were saying, the 15 million. Um, However, they are all toxic to the mitochondria, and that's because of what they do. All mycotoxins disrupt the membrane, which makes it hard for the mitochondria to make energy. They're all neurotoxic. They're all toxic to the organs of our detoxification. So they hurt the very organs that are trying to get rid of them. So kidneys, liver, gut. The microbiome on its own can degrade mycotoxins if it's a healthy microbiome, but it can't do that over and over and over every day, every day, every day. That's like a one-off kind of thing. If you ate some, but we can support certain probiotics that we know will degrade these mycotoxins. Um, so yeah, I think the chronic activation, this is why I treat the nose, because it so often is the reservoir for continuing presence. And you have this person that is just so fragile we already know from Dr. Bredeson's work that mycotoxins can get in the brain. They can lead to a dementia. He calls it Alzheimer's type 3. So for me, I want to see somebody completely well after this, because then they're not the person who's just waiting for that next thing to tip them over and have something more serious happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And then that whole other layer with the amygdala and the fight or flight response and all of that, just from being chronically in fight or flight from mold as well.
Mm-hmm.
Hypervigilance and your autonomic dysfunction and all of those things. So yeah, I think the nervous system is a huge piece, and we really
You,
can't ignore it clinically. I think it can go a little too far where people say, oh, this is the answer, right, to do just nervous system regulation, but it has to be part of the protocol. I mean, I've definitely had people who messaged me saying, okay, I felt a shift in my body finally, and you can kind of just relax again. So if you're in fight or flight for however long and then you finally take care of that, then it can be really powerful.
I'm so glad you said that. I have kind of a soapbox about that. I do not agree that you can think yourself out of a sick building. I've just seen so many times over my, couple decades now, where it's just like they were, a family was told, or, the sick one in the family, and, a sick mom and a sick kid usually, are sort of like, poo-pooed and all of that. I guess the term is gaslit. Um, and told like it's just you need to get your thinking right. And like you said, that has a role, but you should not. I'm sorry to should on people, but should not uh, be in a sick building. We know these things are toxic to humans. They're toxic to animals. We get dogs and cats get sick. You can't outthink your way from that. You need to be out of the sick building. And I do consults, peer-to-peer consults all day long. And I work with really smart doctors who have these beautiful plans, and they're not sure like why. So I get called in as a second opinion for why isn't this working? And I would say over 85% of the time it's not working because the patient is still in mold. So let's start there.
Yep.
That's why it's step one in my, peel the orange, because it's
Yes.
getting out of mold. You might be on that side of the coin. There's a 50-50 split in general, people who can just get out of mold and get better. Like, let's see if you're that. And then you don't have to spend any money on appointments and supplements and all of that, Get out of the mold first. And I know that's hard to do.
Yes, yeah, it can be so hard, but it is so important, and people, don't want to hear it sometimes because, we don't want to hear it. We want to hear
I
the
never
thing
want
that
to
we
hear
can
it.
take. We can hear, we just want to take something, and then, we don't have to deal with it's so expensive, it's so overwhelming. But yeah, when people come to me, that's one of the first things that I ask for sure is, what's the current environmental situation? Do we know?
Mhm.
And if
And
we don't know, we got to figure it out.
getting experts for that.
Absolutely.
Your doctor should not be managing that from the clinical space. They have no training. They have no training in
Nope.
buildings. So hire the experts. There are many really good inspectors that will do virtual consults. Not all inspectors are created equally, so I need to just say that out loud. There are many that miss mold that will not be testing for mycotoxins, which is a big blind spot in the environmental professional world. So you may need to do your own mycotoxin testing, which you can do yourself through real-time labs. But that should be part of the assessment. So not all of them are created equally, but those that are, out talking to you and I, out on social media, they're big-hearted people, and they can do virtual consults. So the home has to be assessed.
Absolutely so true. And I love what you said about the doctor should not be trying to do the environmental side because yeah, that's not our training. Yes, sometimes people will send me like a ERMI result and, I'm like, okay, well, I know what it shows, but that's not my lane to give you any recommendations as far as environmental wise. We can comment on, okay, you're more sensitive to mold, so we should
Yeah.
make sure to have a really low mold, levels. They won't be tolerated if they're higher, than a certain amount. But definitely like to stay in our lane. So,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
It just break. I'm very, as you know from taking the class, I have a whole like soapbox I get on about that because I have seen where, a 4-year-old got leukemia because the doctor tried to do an ERMI and then decide what needed to happen in the home, and I'm just like, no, 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 no. I've seen MS, I've seen ALS, I've seen all kinds of like cancer in people who where their doctor tried to manage the house. It's worth it. You can live in studs, get the mold out, and then you can earn the money or whatever to do the rebuild. You're more resilient than you ever know. And getting that out of your environment and getting your head clear, that's critical importance.
Absolutely. Yeah, very, very serious disease can be triggered and exacerbated. So, I want to go back to what you said a few minutes ago about treating the nose because I am so glad I took your courses first because a lot of people, don't do that. And I just got a message today from a client who's been on the sinus probiotics and just saying just remarkable improvement from being on a sinus regimen. Hasn't felt this well in years, and it was because the sinuses hadn't been addressed. So I mean, do you see that a lot where that's
Yeah,
kind of the thing that people were missing?
for sure. And I was missing it. I mean, it was up until I think it was 2013 or 14, Dr. Brewer's study where they were taking samplings of, testing tissue. So they did sinus, gut, lung, I think they even did brain. And they found that lo and behold, everybody has fungus in their sinuses. So that's not the big news. The big news is people who have been made sick from a water damaged building, their sinuses had mycotoxins. The healthy people did not. And that's when I was like, oh, this is colonization. That means that the ones that are in these people's noses that are making mycotoxins are trying to become residents, not tourists. We're always breathing in spores and then we're supposed to breathe them out. And we're supposed to have, our snot is all part of our immune system. It's supposed to enzymatically, dissolve these things that we don't want. Well, if you have mycotoxins in the air, it's disassembling your immune system of your respiratory passages. And then if you get a spore in there that's trying to become a resident, another spore comes in and then they start fighting. And now you have a mycotoxin factory in your own sinuses. So I started treating, the nose. I was always doing the whole body stuff or systemic antifungals. But when I added the nose, they went like better, 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 better. And I thought,
Mm-hmm.
okay, I'm not going to make my patients suffer longer if I know that this is so effective. So I'm
Yeah.
really bossy about the nose treatment because I
Yeah.
don't want to see them that sick. And when you think about it, like the sinuses are the top of our digestive tube. So every time you swallow postnasal drip, you're seeding the gut. And, it's
Mm-hmm.
like, let's start at the top, plug the
Yeah,
leaks.
it can be a source that for the rest of the gut for
Yeah.
sure. Yeah, yeah, I think I know which study you're talking about. That one about chronic illness is naso-sinus
Yep.
biofilms, the culprit. Yeah, that's such a good study.
Oh my
I
gosh,
have to
it
put
completely
that link.
revolutionized my treatment. I
I love
added the
that study.
nasals and I was just like, let me see if this, if it is colonization, let's test it out and wow, what a big difference. Yeah. And then I made all the mistakes, I tried using two things that were too aggressive and da 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 da. But yeah, I've gotten it down now, a little bit more elegant.
Yeah, I mean, I also love how you talk about in your course how you have to use nasal sprays correctly. For example, you can't just kind of spray it up there in any way and expect it to pervade and permeate the sinuses, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And that's why I like things like essential oils like this guy. I always keep these by my little desk because the essential oils are so effective and you can just like inhale them and then they can get to all the cavernous parts of the sinuses. And they're a nice in between for when someone's using a nasal spray. Nasal sprays can get irritating on the nasal tissue. So that's why, the nasal probiotics are so nice. They reset the terrain, they reduce reactivity. You can use red light in the nose, little photobiomodulation. But I love the essential oils because they also have the limbic part. So you're doing the antifungals and you're doing limbic rebalancing. So you don't have to go through this whole, nervous system rigmarole or limbic reactive, limbic training or whatever. You can use things like essential oils and frequency specific microcurrent and, you know, meditation. There's lots of
So
ways
true.
to get at that nervous system.
So true. Yeah, the sinus is a great gateway to the nervous system too, so close to the brain. So we both post online a lot about mold, and I feel like with social media it helps validate a lot of people who were previously dismissed or gaslit, which is really important. Anywhere you feel like nuance is getting lost, or there is anything that you would say is, you need to get on a soapbox about mold and online presence?
I haven't been on enough soapboxes yet for you.
No, I love it. Your soapboxes are very well founded.
That's a great question. I think one thing that I hear a lot is that people feel like they have to use pharmaceuticals to get better.
Hmm.
Whether that's binder with cholestyramine or Welchol, or whether that's, Sporanox or itraconazole for the antifungal. And, I work with people that get better with natural medicine. Where it goes wrong is if we don't understand the way that herbs work. Our body metabolizes them like a food. Drugs are made to kind of combat our natural metabolism so they stay in the bloodstream longer. Herbs are not that way. So they have to be repeated multiple times a day, otherwise, they're not effective. So when people say, oh, yeah, I tried that and it didn't work for me, they're usually trying a single plant like oregano or a single neem or a single Colorex or something like that. And um, they're not used. So the molds are very sophisticated. So I like to use combinations and they need to be repeated. So 3 to 4 times a day and done long term. That's how we move the needle. So if you are somebody who's tried, you really want to do herbs and you tried it and you feel like they failed you, or as an exit strategy to get off the pharmaceuticals, I love to use the herbs. And now, not every herb will do. Those that are good for yeast aren't necessarily good for mold. Yeast is single cell and mold is multicellular, so it's more complicated to get at. It's got more defensive things it can do. So I like to use the herbals that are going to be getting at the multicellular. So oregano is great, thyme is great, but I also love to use propolis, bee propolis. Neem, pau d'arco is huge for deeply embedded mucus. So if somebody's just always snotty or postnasal drip, or you have this weird cough, or you even have mucus in your stool, the pau d'arco is really lovely for that. Old man's beard, I write about that one in my book. I just love that plant because it's so effective against these smart bugs. And all of those, and cloves, I should say, especially cloves, because cloves get at the biofilm. So when we combine all of those together, if you repeat multiple times a day, then where you're getting is that you don't hit that metabolic dip. You're keeping the blood plasma high, and that's where you can really, really move the needle.
Yeah,
That's
I
a pretty
love
good
using
soapbox.
herbs to I love using herbs to get people off of pharmaceuticals for sure. And then yeah, you mentioned the yeast, and so I see so much candida, with mold. They love to hang out together. They're cousins, right? So
Yes,
I
yeah.
mean, yeah, yeah, for sure. And you said that it requires a different strategy though, right?
Yeah. And I kind of think about the fungal family as a hierarchy. And I know you have a book on candida. If candida is really persistent and you can't get rid of it, there's a smarter fungus behind that, and that fungus would be spores. And we can get infections with spores. You can get aspergillosis and things like that. So what's smarter behind that and underneath that is the fungal family, the mushrooms. But we don't want to use, or at least I have found that if I use mushrooms, which are very good for setting the terrain, the mushrooms I think of as like the supreme intelligence of the fungal family. The mold is sort of like the construction workers. here to do a job, tell me what to do. And if you're in my way, I'm going to just like bark at you. That's mycotoxins, right? And then yeast
I
are just
get
like
it.
big
Yeah.
dummies. They're just kind of like, I'm only one celled. I'm not very smart. I don't really have a big brain. I just show up whenever the spores are around. I love, or when there's sugar around. Like they're just kind of like
I love
sugar
that.
addicted
Yeah.
little trolls.
That is so, I love that vivid imagery. That I love that. I'm gonna use that.
Yeah. So, when as you know from the class, once we get the antifungals on board and someone's in recovery mode, we can bring in the medicinal mushrooms to start to reestablish wisdom and grounding and communication networks, just like Paul Stamets calls it the wood wide web, that mycelial network. All of that stuff that's really boosting the immune system. And that's how you get out of being the reactive person, the mold canary who you can't even, go to a restaurant that has even a whiff of a little mildew from their dishwasher, or you're gonna, be in bed for a couple of weeks. But I don't bring that in the beginning because the body will be like, oh my gosh, mold and fungi are taking over. I'm going to give up. And we'll see more neurological problems, more mental health problems, more bloating, more GI disruption, that kind of thing. So I keep them out for a little while, get them going on the plan and antifungals, and then bring in those really smart mushrooms. And that's how we get them out. That's the exit strategy.
Thanks for that. That's really important. I get that question a lot actually. Can I eat mushrooms if I have mold illness? So you're saying that later, the medicinal mushrooms, and what about like regular mushrooms, like consuming them in the diet?
Sure. Yeah. Once they're better. I mean, and I know you do all the time. I see people get all the way better and they just get their life back, Then that includes getting all their foods back and not being salicylate sensitive and oxalate and blah, blah, blah.
Yes.
Like that's the whole goal here. And if you're not getting that kind of progress, really review your protocol and your home because people do get 100% better from this. Now, are there situations where another condition has taken over? Like an MS or like yes. And that's a whole other thing. We need to go and chase that boulder and bring it back. But people can get better from mold. That's, I guess, another social media thing I see is the story that you never get better, remediations don't work. False, 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 false. A good remediation cleans up that house and you have a healthy home. There are a lot of remediations that need to be redone. I think from the class, my tip is always if you are going to have to do a remediation, they will give you too short of a time estimate, always, because they're under pressure to not give you a big bill. Otherwise, you may not hire them, you might hire someone else. So then pick your team that you're going to hire and add an extra day because they will always find more. And if the team is trying to crunch in the whole remediation in the time that the boss, the money people said, they're going to cut corners. And that's where remediations fail.
Absolutely. Yeah. I asked a remediator I know how long some of these jobs take because, when you see these little clips on the video, it's, looks intense. And he said it can be weeks,
Weeks.
so
Yeah.
depends on the degree of the issue and how much they have to do. And then when they possibly uncover more than they have to do. So,
Yeah, and you
yeah.
can get sick if they have to remove all of the containment because they need to use it for the next job. So, we want to make sure that you're setting yourself up for success. So yeah, and so that's the remediations don't work. Yes, they do when they're done right. You just need to set it up for success. And the second thing is, you never get better from mold. False. People can get their bodies back and you get your life back. You know?
So true. I love to say healing is possible. It's
Yeah.
not, hope is not lost.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, you've taught a lot of practitioners. What's one thing you wish that more practitioners understood about helping these patients recover? I know you have a whole course on it, but what's one thing?
Make sure that nature is part of the recommendation. I think that this is a big piece of, we're just not, like you read in the bio, I'm all about healing the earth through healing the inhabitants. And if we're not connected to our earth, that's what's building our bones, that's what's building our muscles, that's where we get our nourishment. The sun is important, the wind is important, the earth is important. Being in touch and getting outside, I think, is not ever put on a prescription pad. It is for my pad, but that's a really important part to get people moving and get them outdoors and connecting with the nature they belong to.
Absolutely. Don't give mold the stagnation that it wants.
No.
Mold loves stagnation. Don't give it what it wants. Get
That's right.
outside, do some grounding.
Yes.
Yes, absorb the Earth's free electrons.
Yeah. And
Yes.
I know a lot of
Yeah.
people are like, yeah, but I'm bedbound, or yeah, but I get so fatigued. It's like, do what you can, that's it's really important, but it's got to be part. We evolved in communion with our planet, in communion with nature, and we're just so separated from it that there are healing things that have nothing to do with something you put in your mouth. They're available outside.
Yes, yes. I live by the beach and yeah, we go there as much as possible. It's
Nice.
amazing. So, and the forest is so healing also. So,
Just anywhere. Forest,
yeah.
desert, like
Yeah.
nature, nature, nature.
Yes. Love it. So, you've contributed to this field in so many ways over the years: clinical work, education, mentorship. What areas are you most excited about or focused on right now, or any new directions?
Well, you probably, maybe people don't know, but I've been working with long haulers and making connections between the virus and the things that were done to it, and making connections with 10 separate conditions that I'm now calling the decad. So I'll be trying to do some education about that, just maybe a public course on how to manage that, how to test for spike protein, how to get it out of your body and that kind of thing, with founded in, good pharmacokinetics. So good, not just like, oh, I've heard this was really good for that. It needs to be done safely. And then, as we just talked about, I'm excited about bringing in the more energy medicine part, the other stuff that I do, and helping people really heal. So I have another book coming out this fall. Working title is How to Really Heal. And because I get the question of like, okay, what in my head, what's the difference between this person who had this condition and two people are the exact same condition, exact same treatment protocols, same causes. One gets better, one doesn't. What's the difference there? And a lot of times it is the how they're approaching healing part, not the what they're doing. And I would really love to equip people with those little magic secrets, because how to really heal is the how part. It's not the what, when, what's the dose, what's the order. That's all important, very important to get the tools. But then how do you apply that tool makes the difference. Yeah.
That is so powerful. That's really exciting. Thanks
Yeah.
for sharing that with us.
That's a
So,
first announcement.
thanks. I'm so excited. Amazing, amazing exclusive announcement from Dr. Jill. Oh my goodness. Amazing. Well, Dr. Jill, this has been so wonderful to get all these insights and hear about your new directions. Thanks again for joining me today.
Yeah, thank you too for all your contributions in your books. It's really, really important that people have all these resources. So, yeah, I honor you with that.
Thanks. All right. Well, this has been the Detox Talks report. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you in the next episode.